Welcome back to Capital Sins, where we uncover true crime stories from the DMV area. I'm your host, Mel, and today we're shedding light on the heartbreaking case of Lamont Adair Jr., a young man full of promise whose life was taken far too soon. Lamont Adair was just 24 years old, a devoted father to his 11-month-old son, a standout athlete, and a passionate advocate for nonviolence. He had dreams bigger than the streets of St. Pleasant, Maryland, where he was raised. At an imposing 6 feet 7 inches tall, he was a force on the basketball court, with opportunity to play professionally in China. His mother told NBC News if they had a gym open at 2 o'clock in the morning, he would go play basketball. But despite his ambitions, his journey was tragically cut short by the very violence he spoke out against. So what happened to Lamont Adair? And how did a life so full of potential end in tragedy? Let's get into it. Lamont Adair had a bright future ahead of him. Born and raised in St. Pleasant, Maryland, he was a devoted father and a promising basketball player. His skills on the court had earned him a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to play overseas in China, an opportunity that would have set him and his family up for a better life. But Lamont's impact wasn't just about sports. He was a role model, encouraging young men in his community to stay out of trouble. He believed basketball could be a way out, a path away from the gun violence that plagued so many neighborhoods. On August 8, 2018, Lamont Adair's life came to a tragic and senseless end. Details surrounding his death are still difficult to comprehend. Reports indicate that Lamont was shot and killed, a victim of the very violence he had worked to prevent. The details of his case highlight the harsh reality that even those who try to escape street violence are not always immune to its reach. His murder left a deep scar on his community. Friends, family, and former teammates were left devastated, mourning a young man who had so much ahead of him. His death wasn't just a loss for his loved ones. It was a loss for his city, for basketball, and for the future he was trying to create. On this evening, Lamont was headed to a training session when a slow-moving gray Toyota approached. Without warning, gunfire erupted. Investigators later found more than a dozen cartridge casings scattered across the pavement. Surveillance footage from a nearby apartment complex captured the horrifying moments. Though the footage was grainy, detectives could make out a few key details. The shooter fired at Lamont from inside the vehicle before jumping out and continuing the attack on foot. Lamont, trying to fight for his life, fell to his knees, but the gunman showed no mercy. Lamont's death was cold and calculated. After the final shots were fired, the killer got back into the car, now sitting in the back seat. An unseen individual inside the vehicle slid over to the driver's seat and sped off, disappearing into the night. When detectives arrived, they quickly began piecing together the scene. Along with the shell casings, they recovered Lamont's phone, hoping it might hold crucial clues. Surveillance footage helped, but the quality was poor. One key detail stood out. The shooter was described as a black male with dreadlocks. But beyond that, police had little to go on. Lamont's family, heartbroken and desperate for answers, took their pleas to the media. They urged anyone with information to come forward. And slowly, the tips started rolling in. As police searched for answers, a woman came forward with a chilling suspicion. She had been a close friend of Lamont's, but at times their relationship had been more than that. And that detail, she believed, was the reason he was killed. The woman told authorities that her ex-boyfriend, Franklin Scott, had a violent temper. She described him as hot-headed and a loose cannon, someone prone to explosive reactions. And when Scott discovered through social media that she and Lamont had grown closer, he lost control. Jealousy, rage, and a history of violence, that was enough to make Scott a person of interest. But detectives needed more than just a theory, and as they dug deeper, the pieces started falling into place. Investigators turned their attention to Franklin Scott, and right away, the details started adding up. First, there was his appearance. The surveillance footage was grainy, but witnesses described the shooter as a black male with long dreadlocks and a shorter frame. That matched Scott perfectly. And then there was his past. Scott had a prior firearms charge, meaning police already knew he had access to weapons. But the biggest clue of all, the vehicle. At the time of the shooting, Scott's personal car was in the shop. Instead, he was driving a rental car, a gray Toyota. The same make and model in the surveillance footage the night Lamont was gunned down. If that wasn't enough, the witness had one more crucial detail to share. On the day of the murder, while she was at work, she received a phone call from Scott. But it wasn't Scott's voice that made her uneasy. It was the voice she heard in the background. It was Olajuwan Jackson, someone she knew. Franklin Scott, the jealous ex-boyfriend with a history of violence, and Olajuwan Jackson, the unknown factor in this deadly puzzle. But the biggest question remained. Who else was in that car that night? And would authorities be able to bring all the pieces together before the killers vanished in the shadows? With Franklin Scott now a prime suspect, investigators launched a full-scale search for him in the rental car used in the murder. It didn't take long to find the vehicle. Inside, they discovered bullet fragments, evidence that confirmed it had been used in the shooting. But one more key piece was missing: the gun. Detectives knew that without the weapon, they'd need an airtight case. That's when they turned their attention to Scott's past. A prior gun charge proved to be the break they needed. They learned that Scott had a court date coming up. Unaware that police were on to him, Scott arrived at the court like it was just another day. But instead of facing his scheduled hearing, he was arrested on the spot. Scott immediately asked for a lawyer, shutting down any chance for questioning. But that didn't stop detectives from keeping tabs on him. While in jail, Scott made a critical mistake. Authorities monitored his phone calls. And in one of them, he told an acquaintance to get rid of his babies. Investigators were convinced that that was code for his guns. And though they never recovered the murder weapon, the weight of the other evidence was enough to seal Scott's fate. Jackson was also arrested. He was charged as an accessory after the fact and sentenced to 6 years in prison. As for Scott, there will be no trial. In a move that surprised some, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. In November 2019, Franklin Scott, just 29 years old, was sentenced to 50 years in prison. For Lamont's family, there was some relief knowing his killer was behind bars. But no sentence could bring back the man they loved. The father, the athlete, the dreamer. His story is yet another reminder of how senseless violence can destroy lives in an instant. And for what? A fit of jealousy? A grudge over a social media post? Lamont Adair was a man with a future that was stolen from him. As we close this episode, I want to leave you with this. Lamont Adair deserved better. And if you or someone you know is caught in a dangerous situation, seek help before it's too late. And if you have a platform, use it to advocate for change. Thank you for listening to Capital Sins. Stay